Hey guys, sorry about that. The Zoom gremlins got me. Yeah, it's funny today. For whatever reason, was my technology day. So my phone died, so I spent 2 hours at AT&T having fun with those guys, and then my Zoom wasn't working. So it's just one of those days. But it's good to see you all. So we've got Renner. All right. Awesome. And we've got Jackson. And we've got Cade. All right. And we've got Haven. I think that's everybody as of right now. We'll go ahead because I'm 11 minutes late. So, um, I'm recording these, so and I'll be putting them up in Discovery every week. So if you want to go back and access, then obviously you can do that. Um, Let me go ahead and open us in prayer, and then we'll get going. Father, I thank you for this day. Father, I thank you for the technology that sometimes doesn't always work perfectly, but it allows us to be connected with each other, albeit at a distance. And so we're just thankful for that. Father, I thank you for these young men and women who love you and are seeking to be the best they can be in your grace and sovereignty and learning how to navigate your world with strength and with confidence and with mental acumen to make good business decisions. We ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right. So before I, um, open up the floor, any questions that you guys have about anything? Are you okay? All right. One thing that I said I would do is I would go over the lab for last week. Are you guys good with that?
That'd be awesome.
Okay, you got it. All right. So I'm going to pull up the key. Good. Just opening that up. All right. So go ahead and share my screen. All right. Can you guys see my screen okay? All right. So let's talk about this first one, the exercise one. So this one, hopefully for um, some of you, is a bit of review. Pretty simple kind of calculations, right? So we've got about 33 records of data. We simply want to calculate the average number of hours online. Um, Obviously, we're going to look at that right here, which, by the way, um, in Excel, if you highlight part of the data, then it will calculate down here at the bottom some of these sort of vital statistics. So 33 records, 6.24 average, max, min, and then the sum if that's something you would need. So we have the average. Um, you can use obviously median to calculate the median hours online. Um, I'm not sure that that would necessarily be available when I simply highlight those. It may be. Um, and then mode, right? So mode single, again, we're just looking at C4 through C36. Same calculations for number of friends. Okay, so no real mystery there. Now, the question is draw charts which adequately explain this data. So, a couple of things we can do, right? So we can aggregate males and females, and you can see that there is a pretty decent relationship between the number of friends that one has and the number of hours online. Now, one thing that we want to sort of point out here is that um, the numbers here for or excuse me, friends or those numbers are a lot bigger than the number of hours online. And so one of the little tricks that we need to do is that our friends, this orange line, this is read off of this left axis here, and the number of hours online is read off of this right axis here. And unless you do that, you are really not going to be able to graphically determine whether there is a relationship between the number of hours online and the number of friends. Were you guys able to figure out how to map the number of hours online on a secondary axis? Or is that something you would want me to show you?
I eventually figured out how to do that.
Okay.
I ended up going with a different strategy for what I actually turned in, but I remember when I was messing around with it, I was able to put up the dual y-axis there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that it's a little sneaky, Renner, because um, you know, sometimes I've seen students where they will have the number of friends and it will look like this, seesaw kind of up and down. And then the number of hours is just a flat line, right? And so you're like, well, that's not really what we were looking for. And
Doesn't help
so,
you visually.
yeah, it doesn't really help you visually. So, I right clicked on number of hours online, and if I go back to primary axis, right, I can't really tell what the heck's going on, right? Because the scale is so different, right? And so what I want to do is I want to right click on whichever data series is not mapped to the left y-axis, and I want to select secondary axis. Okay. So it might seem like sort of a trivial thing, but if you're currently in your quote big job or you're hoping to soon be in your big middle management job, your boss, he or she, are going to want to know, okay, so why do these lines, they don't look like they're doing the same thing. So selecting that secondary axis is going to be important so that you can try to see graphically if there is any kind of relationship. Okay. Now, a couple of things we can do around this second question. So, is there any relationship across gender? Okay. And so, what we can see, this is actually, this should say males and females. Okay. So, if we were sort of do the quote unquote poor man's version, we would say, well, I can sort of look at the males and look at the females, but it's a little bit, um, it's a little bit confusing because I've got both genders going on the same chart. So you might say, well, you know what? I want to look at males separate from females. And so one thing that we do see is that males, there is a pretty good um, relationship between the number of friends and the number of hours online, which to me is a little counterintuitive, right? I mean, this is sort of a zoom in of this left section of this chart where they're both on the same chart. But what was a little surprising to me, and I don't know if this data is real, and again, not trying to be sexist at all, but it's sort of intriguing here. There seems to be less of a relationship between the number of friends and the number of hours online, at least in this data, for females versus males. Okay. So, so if we split out and we look at simply males versus females, then we can get perhaps a better graphical picture, right? So you might say, well, how would I do that? Okay, so let's say we want to go ahead and we want to look at gender. We want to just look at females, and we're going to look at the relationship between hours online and number of friends. So I'm going to hit insert. Let's do our line chart. We've got our same problem, right? So we've got to right click on that, format data series, secondary axis. And now we can label this females. And, um, graphically, there seems to be a pretty good correlation between, except for we've got, what do we do? We've got like two or three where it's a little bit um, not correlating very well. So you might say, well, what am I supposed to think about that? Well, a couple of things. One, I've only got, let's see, I've only got 20 females. And statistically, we like to see a sample of about 30 or more, because as a general rule, when we have a sample size of 30 or above, that sample tends to have um, a normal distribution curve or exhibit a bell curve. So we have less than 30 here. So we might say, well, you know what? These two or three females here, they might be outliers. So maybe we ought to throw those out. Don't know, right? If we had 30 or more, we would say, well, maybe they're not outliers when I add 10 more. If I look at males, I only have 13. So, I'm quite a bit short. I'm 17 short of 30. So, I think it might be a little bit difficult for us to have a definitive statement about the relationship between hours and number of hours and number of friends, male versus female. But we could just sort of visually look at it and go, huh, well, I don't know. Maybe males are a little bit more correlated to number of hours and friends versus females. Now, in a future lab, we're going to learn or review how to calculate a correlation coefficient. And that correlation coefficient will give us a sort of, well, really gives us a number between 0 and 1 that will tell us how highly correlated or not highly correlated are the number of friends and the number of hours online. But here I'm just trying to give us a sort of a poor man's version of, maybe I could sort of look at this and infer something. Um, any questions about that? Hopefully that is fairly clear. Um, This one, almost everyone did quite well, right? So we're using simply these calculations. What is one thing that I think I was a little bit murky on, so I'm not going to count off on that. But there's actually, I think, three different types of standard deviation, one for sample, one for population, and then one that is just sort of agnostic. So any of those three for this exercise or this lab, I would count. Um, and quite frankly, I haven't really tested the calculation differences. I'm certain there is a difference. I probably have to have a much larger data set to be able to appreciate those differences. Um, so, so the standard deviation here, if you use .s or .p, or uh, you didn't include any kind of suffix at all, I would count that. Now, where some people had some challenges was around these count if calculations here. So, um, you just have to kind of be careful. Okay, what is the variable type? Okay, so I'm looking at miles per gallon. Okay, that should be um, excuse me, that should be fairly easy to calculate, right? In fact, all of these should be relatively easy to calculate. I think where people get confused or made mistakes is they didn't look closely enough to see, are we doing greater than or less than? Okay. Um, and so I think that's where people have had some challenges in the past. So it's just making sure that you're reading, okay, count if greater than four, right? So I need to make sure I'm looking at the right column. So this is number of cylinders, column I, and then so I equals count if, open parentheses, highlight the data that I want Excel to examine, and then I put in comma, and then I'm going to use quotation marks with the greater than or less than, or we could do greater than and equal to if we wanted to, and then close parenthesis, or excuse me, close quote, and then close parentheses. That one is pretty straightforward. When people make mistakes, it's that they just miss the greater than or less than. You might be asking yourself, so why would I want to, why would I want to use Excel to do these calculations? So, um, when I first started in corporate America, um, I worked in what we called the traffic department. Not necessarily a very glamorous area, but it was certainly very important. So, working in that area, one of my responsibilities was um, as we would have printers come off the manufacturing line, I would have to reserve ocean containers. So if you've ever been to a big port like Los Angeles or Virginia Beach or Norfolk or Miami, and you see right there on the coast, you'll see a crane and all of these they look like little box cars, right? They're actually kind of cool, especially if you're flying in, you have kind of a really cool aerial view. But my job was to determine how many containers I would need to ship finished printers or printer kits from Lexington to Manaus, Brazil. And so I had to know, okay, what were the dimensions of all the different printers that were being ordered and shipped? And I would have to do the calculations like this to be able to work with the freight forwarding company and the shipping company to say, I need four 55-foot containers. And then I might have less than a LTL, less than a trailer load. And so I would basically have to do an optimization calculation to figure out how many containers will I need in order to make sure that all the product gets there, but not to overbuy the number of containers that I would actually need. So here we're looking at automobiles, miles per gallon is really, really not going to matter too much. But some of these, right, like weight, um, country of origin. I mean, for some, I mean, tariffs have been in the news quite a bit recently. So, if these are automobiles, for example, that are coming from China, well, we might have a tariff thing, and so the country of origin is going to be pretty important. And maybe I have to separate out uh, cars that are coming from China versus Malaysia versus Germany, and so on. So this is, sort of a real life example of if I am responsible for shipping product from one country to another, I want to be able to measure all of these products that need to move from one country to another, and then minimize the cost associated with that shipment. Does that make sense? Hopefully, yes. All right, so number three, this is the bugaboo here. All right, so um, there were quite a few people that had challenges with this. So I took stock price close data from Yahoo Finance. You can see this is quite 5 years ago, and looked at four different stocks: Xerox, GE, Tesla, and Apple. This first part is pretty easy, right? So we just use Excel commands to do these calculations, right? Not too hard. Now, one thing we can do, right, is to calculate the stock price returns. In fact, that'll be very important for us to be able to look at, what was my beginning value, close price versus the ending. And so you can see Xerox had a really bad year. GE, not a great year. Tesla's not been doing so great recently with all the Doge stuff and what have you, but at least in 2020, really had a great year. And then Apple, a really good year as well. All right, so we've got this, these calculations around how did each one of these stocks perform over a given year, max, min, the average, and then, of course, those of you that have had Finance 351 or Finance before, the standard deviation starts to speak to what's called a beta coefficient. So it's basically trying to understand if the market goes up, does a given stock, does it go up proportionate to the market, or does it go up or down more than the market or less than the market? Um, or excuse me. So if the market goes up 10% and a beta coefficient is above one, then is it going to go up 11%, 12%, and so on? As opposed to if I have a beta coefficient that is less than one, then if the market goes up 10%, a given stock with a beta of less than one is going to go up less than 10%. So hopefully that makes sense. So the standard deviation gives you a sense of the variability of the stock close price over a given time period. So that's sort of complexity number one. Complexity number two is we've got four different investors. They all invested $1,000, but their portfolio stock allocations were different. Bob basically said, "Hey, I'm going to put 1/4 or $250 in each one of these four." Sue heavied up on Tesla. Maybe she feels like she's willing to handle a little bit more risk. John probably, is thinking, well, GE historically has been a pretty, high dividend yield, sort of a blue chip stock. So I'm going to sort of heavy up there. And then Jane looks like she has more of a risk tolerance, but likes Apple more than Tesla. So, given those um, stock price, or excuse me, those stock allocations, now what I need to do is I need to calculate the weighted average return for Bob, Sue, John, and Jane. Okay. So, for example, you know, Bob had a, 96%, and he was even all the way across, right? And because he had 1/4 exposure in Tesla and Apple, it made up for not so great in Xerox and GE. Sue heavied up on Tesla, and Tesla had 365% return. So she did quite well, right? John had, excuse me, had a 56% return. He heavied up on GE, but he had exposure in Tesla and Apple. And then Jane, um, 85% return. So, given the fact that all of them had exposure to Tesla and Apple, but less than or varied relative to one another, then you can see the differences in the after 1 year dollar amount. Now, where some people sometimes make mistakes, right, is that they didn't add back the additional 1,000, right? So, for example, Sue started with 1,000, but because she had um, almost what is that, 3x? Yeah, almost 3x, 190%. She almost tripled her money, right? From 1,000 to almost 3,000. So, if you drill into finance, you're going to spend a lot of time doing these kinds of calculations. But what I'm trying to have you guys understand is that we have these measures of location, min, max, average, standard deviation. Well, okay, that's fine, but how do I apply that? Well, I need to be able to look at variability between 2 points in time and then multiply that or calculate a weighted average based upon the weightings of each one of these four different portfolios and the exposure that each one of these four people had across varying levels of risk associated with Xerox versus GE versus Tesla versus Apple. All right, I did a lot of talking. I'm gonna pause. Do you guys follow what we did there?
I think I'm following. I
Mm.
what I how I approached it is I tried to calculate shares and do my calculations based off of that,
Ooh,
what the
wow.
average share
Okay.
price was.
Okay. All right.
And that gave me very it was close. It was the same for Bob for some reason, but everybody else was off by like a couple $100, but the trends were still the same.
Yeah, I remember looking at yours, Renner, and I thought it was, I definitely remember your lab submission because directionally it was the same direction, but I was like, why is he off a little bit? That was interesting. So, congratulations. I mean, you had the direction, right, but the precision wasn't, where we would want it. But what's
Yep.
interesting, the weighted average, that is something that for whatever reason, I don't know why, if like maybe we don't teach that in high school anymore. Um, but that weighted average calculation will be your friend because when you're in a management situation and you're looking at different if you're looking at measurements of different variables over time, then that weighted average is super important for us.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I was in like a different universe in terms of what I did.
Okay.
It was completely like it was like literally completely wrong. So,
Okay.
is there I guess my question to you is when approaching this stuff, I've been out of the academic world for almost 20 years. So, is
Okay.
there a is there some sort of foundational understanding that everybody pretty much has is that would guide decision making on how they would approach this problem? Because I looked at it from like I didn't even know where to start.
Okay.
So is there was there something in terms of what we had in terms of the resources, the reference that we could have utilized, or is there just a basic mathematical understanding that everybody's drawing from that I'm just
Yeah.
not there?
Well, first of all, Jonathan, I would just say, kudos to you. Um, when I went back to school, I guess it was 7 years ago, I had been out of school 30 years. So I sort of feel your pain. Um, but I would just say that this would be sort of what I might call general mathematical knowledge of, understanding basic statistics, um, and then thinking about, okay, how would I calculate that? And in a weighted average, if it's something that you don't do very often, I don't know that you would necessarily automatically know that. Um, but what I would say is, please hear me. Don't be discouraged. If for the lab coming up this week, if you're like, man, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here, please text me or email me, and we can jump on, a Zoom or a phone call or whatever, and we can work together on it. Okay.
Okay. No, great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand where you're coming from, believe it or not. So thank you for the question. Anybody else?
I feel like I'm in the same boat as Jonathan. I don't really have like a very strong accounting background or like kind of statistical background, so a lot of this is very new to me as well.
Okay. And that's okay. You know what? I really, I am more than happy if you have a question or I'm not really sure how to approach that, please, 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 let me know via email or text. Um, and I'm happy to jump on a call and we can work on it together. Okay. Well, Renner, do you have a question, sir?
Yes. Similar kind of in tone to the last few.
Okay.
Just as like a barometer,
Sure.
how much time should we expect to spend on these labs per week? Like that we can kind of use as just a rough, like, hey, if I'm pushing like 5 hours working on one of these exercises, should I request help?
Man, oh, what a beautiful question. So what and I love the wisdom that you just shared. So what I would say is that if you spend, I don't know, if you're pushing an hour, hour and a half, and it's like, man, I'm lost. Please let me know. Okay. Because at some point, right, it's like, okay, I just want to throw my PC out the window or whatever, because it's, and then we get into a negative situation. So I would just encourage you that if you're spending an hour or more and it's like, holy cow, I really tried but I'm needing some help. That's okay. That's why we're here. Okay. So just if you can sort of feel like in your heart of hearts, man, I gave this my all, and I checked on YouTube and I did a bunch of Google stuff, and I'm stuck. Please reach out and we'll work on it together. Okay.
That is really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's my pleasure. So.
I thought I was right when I was done too, by the way. So
Hey, hey, trust me.
that made it worse.
I thought I was right on a lot of stuff in my life, and I'm like, doggone it, I wasn't right. And that's okay. I mean, that's how we learn, right? So, um, plus, the Lord blessed me. I was able to make a pretty good living by being a numbers nerd. And so this stuff is sort of like breathing to me. Um, it's my honor to be able to help you all in whatever way I can. So, anybody else?
This was a humbling lab to go through because I considered myself, yeah, similar to these guys. I'm not coming from a strong like financial or statistical background when approaching this class, but I considered myself pretty, fluent in Microsoft Excel, and then I'm hitting this very first exercise, going, oh man, not as fluent as I thought I was.
Well, hey, I would say don't feel like you're alone, Renner. Um, you know, I think, when I, again, 30 years after being out of school, and going back and finishing my doctorate, um, it was extremely humbling. And so, um, for better or worse, I don't know why the Lord sort of organized the universe where sometimes when we need to learn something, then humility is like the best thing we can do. And but it was
Mhm.
definitely a tough pill for me to swallow because heck, I'd spent 30 years in corporate America. I thought I knew a bunch of stuff, and turned out there was a lot of stuff I didn't know. So if you feel like you're feeling a bit of humility, just know that you're in really good company. Okay. And it's not intended for you or anyone to feel bad. It's intended for you to go, man, this is really good. I thought, I'm working on a really good base, but there's a lot of stuff I can learn, and that's okay. I mean, that's why, we want to be lifelong learners. And it's really a honor for me to work with you all. Are very smart people. We're just sort of learning and refining our skills is all. So
Thank you, Dr. Ross. That's really encouraging.
yes, sir. I assure you, I felt very humbled over 5 years. Between like 2018 and 2023. There's a lot of falling on my butt, so to speak. And so, if you feel like you feel a little bit of that, just again, you're not alone. So, and the key is if you get stuck, please reach out because I am more than happy to help in any way I can. So. By the way, so if I'm gonna switch over to our, here we go. So we are in week 2. So one of the things that I'm hoping you all are sort of appreciating about this course is that, metaphorically speaking, all of this business analytics kind of stuff here, all the Excel stuff, that's really sort of building our toolkit. Okay. So we're learning, hey, let's learn about Excel and let's learn how we can do some of these, basic statistical kind of what we call measures of location, mean, median, mode, standard deviation. Um, and then as we continue to sort of go up the level of difficulty, my hope is, toward the end of, well, I mean, we go through week 6, and we should have a pretty robust toolkit. Okay. We may not know how all the tools work perfectly, but at least we sort of know, hey, I've got a wrench and a Phillips screwdriver and a standard screwdriver, whatever. And then the hope is that as you're working through reading these, competitive strategy, positioning, managing customer value, and then applying both of those uh, to the cohort exercises and the best textbook, that now you're like, hey man, now I got a pretty good toolkit and I'm working on some really interesting business problems that are complicated, but I think I've got a pretty good set of tools that can help me try to figure out, okay, what the heck's going on here and how should I approach this and solve this. So hopefully, you're sort of satisfying your left brain with a lot of the Excel analytics stuff, and then you start to sort of bleed into sort of the right brain stuff around, I've got a problem, and then I need to analyze this problem with my toolkit and what I'm learning from Reese and Trout and Gale and Porter and Levitt, and then applying that to sort of build the story around, hey, I've got these cohort assignments. Let's sort of figure out, a beginning, a middle, and an end so that, th those of you that have been in the workplace in a professional setting, for several years, or, Jonathan, you were saying, 20 years. For better or worse, our bosses, all of our executives want to sort of know what's the bottom line. Okay. I'm paying you a lot of money. I need you to sort of figure out what's going on and then tell me, what's sort of the punchline here. And so my hope is that this is sort of equipping you for that process. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of give you all a little bit of a context and the sort of the method to the madness. So, any questions you all have about anything at this point? Right. Well,
I know I had questions about like
yes, sir.
Excel Lab 2. I can wait until like later if anybody else has other things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's look at lab two. Okay. We won't reveal the key just yet, but let's look at whoops. I almost opened the key. Look how tricky that was. Ooh. All right. So actually, let me go to, yeah, I had to reboot. So here we go. I'll go back into Discovery. Let me see if I can provide a little bit of context because I know, Haven, you had some questions on that. So let's take a look.
Yeah, mostly on exercise 3 is kind of the area specifically.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I appreciate that. Uh-oh.
Mm-mm.
Sorry, guys. It kind
Even
of,
like the phone, that's the worst.
yeah, look at that. It sort of ki it kicked us off, didn't it?
I
Can you
think we
guys?
all we all stayed on, but it stopped the recording and kicked you off.
Oh, wow, did it? Woo-wee. Paused. Oh, it looks like it's still, wait a second.